In 1964, the Kinks recorded one of the most influential hits of all time, You Really Got Me. This song positioned the young band to follow the Beatles into the American market. How would the Kinks transport their unique sound created in the town of Muswell Hill to America?
If you look at the way that the group would rehearse in the 1960s, they would travel up to Ray's house in North London, would gather round his piano and would sing along.
Raymond Douglas Davis was born on June 21, 1944, and on February 3, 1947, David Russell Gordon Davis came along, rounding out Anne and Frederick Davis's family of 10.
So it was always music in the house. My sisters played piano and sang, and my dad played banjo, and there was music. And in those days, growing up in North London, we used to make our own entertainment.
Ray Davies, you know, he had 6 older sisters to take care of him. And then when he was 3 years old, Dave, through no fault of his own, was born into this family. And suddenly, you know, Paradise became this sibling rivalry thing.
From the beginning, it was apparent that the brothers were different. Ray was a quiet, poetic kid.
Inside, he's shy, quiet, retiring.
Ray had a sister, Renee, who doted on him. And he had nagged her as a boy to buy him a guitar. She bought him the guitar and she gave it to him, and the same evening she went out dancing and she collapsed on the dance floor and she died.
Ray's sister Renee had an undiagnosed hole in her heart.
So you got Ray in one hand, the excitement of getting this amazing present, and also the emotion of my sister dying.
The thing he associates with his fortune, his guitar, is also the thing that's synonymous with the death of his sister. So there must be some very mixed up feelings there.
While Ray was more of an introvert, Dave, being the baby of the family, was the polar opposite, an extroverted rebel.
My feelings of my childhood and growing up prior to the Kinks were very happy, but very sad, very gritty, but loving and emotional.
But Dave's wild style would eventually get him into trouble.
Dave Davis had been in a relationship with a young girl called Sue. His age, they were at school together, I believe.
I was totally swept off my feet. It took over my whole life.
Their passion was uncontrollable. One afternoon in a London park, they were caught in the act by truant officers. Dave was promptly expelled from school.
And she had become pregnant, and the two families had got together and conspired to keep them apart.
Sue's parents were telling her that I didn't want her anymore, and my parents were telling me that she didn't want me anymore. So imagine, you carry that around with you as you grow up. And I think it really messed me up a lot, emotionally a lot.
By the age of 15, Dave had dropped out of England's school system. He would write and sing about this event for the rest of his life.
Perhaps the reason for his kind of very manic partying in that era is partly because he doesn't want to have to think about this other thing.
Sometimes, to do what the Kinks did when we first started, you needed the anger, that rage to do it. You know, it was quite a motivating thing.
30 years would pass until Dave and Sue eventually reunited. Their reunion was a happy one, and it also gave Dave a chance to meet his daughter. Ray was also smitten by the love bug at a young age when he met 17-year-old Rasa Dispetris.
Ray gets married in the mid-1960s to Rasa Davis, and she can be heard singing on the Kinks records of the period. She was the first person that Ray would play his songs for.
Our managers didn't want Ray to get married and thought that if you got married and you were in a rock band, that the fans wouldn't come and see you, wouldn't buy your records.
Rasa would play an influential role in Ray's work, and to the discomfort of the band, her voice began to be heard in the studio too.
Worst thing was having that woman there giving you advice over the microphone into the studio. You know, oh, can't you play it more like this?
Ray struggled to find the right balance in his life as husband, father, and budding rock star.
You know, while his brother was out raving it up in Carnaby Street, Ray was at home with a new wife and babies.
I was 20 and married, and girls falling at my feet, but that sort of thing. And so was Dave, but Dave had a more wilder lifestyle.
This balance was often disrupted by Ray and Dave's constant battling. At times, the brothers' very public disputes threatened the survival of the band.
Every rock and roll band is a recreation of the dysfunctional family. And in the case of the Kinks, they didn't even have to recreate the dysfunctional family. It was the original dysfunctional family.
It was obvious that Ray and Dave were trying to fight it out between each other, who was going to be the top man in the band, you know.
When Ray and Dave decided to have a go at each other, I would call a 15 or 20-minute coffee break and let them go to it. You know, and the rest of us used to go and go have a cigarette and have a cup of coffee, and when they were done, we'd come back and start over again.
The band did put aside their differences long enough to begin recording demos. It was at this time that they also came across two young socialites, Robert Wace and Grenville Collin, who would want to become their managers.
Wace and Collins were the Kinks' management. You know, they were quite a strange, upper-class duo who had no real experience in this area, and yet had the chutzpah and the charm.
I thought it was the most exciting prospect because I was a young boy, you know, I was 16 years old, entering into a business that I'd always loved. I thought, oh, you know, they'll look after us and nice people. And I was really quite naive. I think we all were.
This is the great 60s thing, these opportunities for people who previously would not have had the opportunity. The flip side of that is they often didn't know what they were doing.
Wace and Collins only made the band's life even more confusing, getting the band another manager, Larry Page, and a tour promoter, Arthur Howe.
They were uniquely disadvantaged with their management because there were already so many of them.
Well, that's when it started to get very, very difficult, very hard. It was all due to the greedy little Robert and Grenville duo. They wanted us out there playing as much as we could, doing as much as we could, cashing in all over the place so they could get paid.
Despite their inexperience, Wace and Grenville managed to get the Kinks' demo one fine day to Shel Talmy, a young American producer who had a production deal with a small label known as Pi Records.
The first time I ever heard the Kinks was when I was actually in Denmark Street at a publisher, and Robert Wace was one of their new managers, walked in, and he said, anybody here would want to listen to a demo? I said, sure. Loved what I heard, and I said, let's pursue it and see what's happening.
He was great. He didn't know what he was doing either, but that was probably why it was so good.
We were all kind of around the same age. We were all a bunch of kids.
The Kinks' management deals were made legally binding in January of 1964, and within a few months' time, the band suddenly realized they had practically signed away everything.
It does seem pretty clear that they signed a bunch of bad contracts and that they were making a lot of money for people other than the Kinks.
Even in those days, I thought, you bastards, you really don't care about us, do you?
You know, and we had agents and we had, you know, other people to pay, and it was like 60%, we're left with 40%, and we've got to pay all the expenses out of that, and there's 4 of us.
Despite these obstacles, the Kinks released 3 hit singles and 2 albums. When it came time for them to invade America, many wondered if the sibling rivalry and band management would be too much for them to bear.
Ray had suffered a breakdown because he couldn't really cope with the workload that was being put on him by the record company and the management.
Ahead of them lay their all-important trip to America, but the land of opportunity would not make the Kinks. In fact, it would almost break them.